This video is brought to you by Squarespace.
You like my new cup? Spooky, babe. My neighbor gave this to me. So it's that time of year again. Your girl is tired. I don't know if I've complained about daylight savings time before on the channel, but oh my god, it's just debilitating. I want to go to sleep at 4 p.m. now. I'll adjust. It's okay. But I'm also coming off the back of an absolutely insane Halloween season where I made a lot of stuff, encountered some new challenges that I had never done before. Anyways, all of these factors have culminated in me really wanting some cozy art time. I haven't sat down and just done a fun illustration in a while to kind of just practice the broad range of artistic applications and techniques, and I'm feeling that itch to do some fun, ambitious, story-driven artwork, and one of my favorite ways to do this is by drawing your characters. If I remember correctly, I have done 2 of these videos in the past, and you guys seem to really like them. I had an absolute blast making both of those videos, but I felt it was time to once again open up my email to the masses and have y'all send in your characters as contenders for this video. So I posted on my Instagram story telling y'all that this was happening again. It's been a couple of days, the swarm of emails has come in, so let's have a little sneak peek at all of y'all's lovely characters. Alright, as you can see, we have a lot of submissions here going on. Thank you all so much for doing that. I'm not gonna be able to go through all of these, obviously, but let's have a look. We have a submission from Snails who says, "This is Zoe. It's been a while since I wrote about her lore, but she's an alien that crash landed in some rural town. She secretly works at a car garage with a family that took her in while she tries to fix up her ship." Zoe is absolutely adorable. I love the vibe. I love a mechanic girly too. It's just such a good aesthetic. Next we have a submission from Tommy or Tomy. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Submitted Penelope Locke. She's a steampunk engineer for an airship and she's a little off-center. We have another mechanic girly. That's so fun and I love this design. I currently play as an artificer in D&D, so like this aesthetic is very close to my heart. Now O'Neill has submitted their OC Aelin. Aelin is a part of a group of his adopted family known as Heavenly Waters. Aelin is the master of water tricks and illusions, though he has many skeletons in his closet. He's the youngest in this group and treated like a baby. It's quite a dichotomy there, but this design is so fun and cool. It like, ooh, I just, the streetwear of it all, but like fantasy streetwear. I'm very into that aesthetic. Next we have a Gyaru aquatic monster OC called Madison, submitted by Rosa Stera. And Madison is very, very cute. Very fashion. So this next one is Cassandra, submitted by Noodle Fusa. And Cassandra is a flower witch, it seems. She seems to collect different flowers and is out to collect all of the flowers in her realm, which is very cool. And she's also a cyclops. And can I just say, this character design is the cutest thing. I mean, that's adorable, and I'm such a sucker for a witch character. Just mwah. Very tempting. Here we have Kay, who submitted Alexander Magnus. She says Alexander is the head magician in the Twilight Circus, a mysterious circus that on the outside seems normal and slightly spooky, but from within is controlled by the Entity, an evil being who is held back by the magician, Alexander Magnus. I also love this image. The hairstyle is just real cute here. We love a Padawan braid. The eye on the hand, also, you know, I'm a sucker for that. Next we have Zara? Don't know. Submitted by October, and this character design is very, very cool. Also, very cool detail here that is rumored as a banished witch, but her form was once human and many years of magic distorted her body. Very cool. I like that vibe with magic lore where it's like magic has consequences. I don't think this is a bad consequence because Zara looks freaking sick. This next one is submitted by Esteban, and it seems to be a group that are in a band together. We have Kenji, Isabel, and Daniel. I think the band is called Ghost Notes. Anyways, apparently, like I said, in a band together and their instruments are haunted, which I think is such a fun concept. And I just really like the character designs too. They have like a lot of personality and they seem like definitely part of a world that's well inhabited. Very cute. Next we have Silvara, submitted by Bamboo Beth, who is a tiefling Dampier with a vengeance paladin. Very cool design though. I love a tiefling Dampier. That is also what I happen to be playing in D&D right now, and adding like, you know, any kind of night vibes to that is just immaculate. So fun. Ooh. Next we have a whole collection of OCs submitted by Kelp Lost at Sea on Tumblr. We have Ira, Emerald, I think Cycross, Connie, and Lucas. Again, I don't know if I'm saying that right. These character designs are all so fun and cool. I also really love the art style. All the bold colors and everything. The title of this email is also perfect. Sword lesbian with deer-related trauma and bird boy who is the god of death and others. Scrolled down and I saw all these references and I was like, whoo! These are just absolutely gorgeous, adorable character design. I love this art style. And I love a friend group, Friends of the Willow. Aspen said that they are a comic and convention artist and they have 3 OCs from their comic called Friends of the Willow. So here we have some cute witch boyfriends, Beck and Will. They say that Will is a green witch and Beck is a necromancy witch. And a fun little fact about Will is that his familiar is the literal devil in the form of a goose. Lyra Lovebird, who is a tiefling ranger and a paladin of the goddess Aphrodite. She can be summoned and help with love-type problems, romantic, self-love, platonic, etc., and give advice. Look at her! Lyra is so cute. Trick submitted by Grem, and this character is a foxkin rogue in D&D, and she likes to roleplay as a hero in order to get away with her numerous crimes. And she is also very shape. I love this art and character design. Let's see, the Scribbler. Oh, that's so fun. Oh, the Scribbler. Look at the Scribbler. I love the hair. There's ink, you guys. Look at Cecil the pencil. Oh, the pencil has a goth mode, a swimming mode. Oh, it's adorable. All right, next we have Lilith, and she is a mouse witch. She's a mouse witch, you guys. So cute. Look at Lilith. She's adorable. As someone who read a lot of Bunnicula as a child, I am a sucker for this type of character. But before I get to all of my chosen submissions, let me keep you guys in suspense for just another moment while I tell you about this video sponsor, Squarespace. Whenever I'm done with big illustrations like these, I usually send them over to my Squarespace portfolio where they can be viewed in full size in all of their glory. And the weird formatting and cropping of social media doesn't really have to affect them. I've hosted my portfolio on Squarespace for years now, and I love how simple and easy everything is. You can get started with your portfolio by choosing one of their professionally designed flexible website templates that give you lots of options for customization later on, like text and colors, website graphics, lots of customization like videos and galleries and links using their drag and drop website builder, Fluid Engine. Those original templates also cater to different niches, which makes it even easier to get started building your website. And from there, maintaining your website is also a breeze. When you add new pieces to your Squarespace portfolio galleries, for example, all you have to do is go into your device, choose whatever files you want to have, upload them to your gallery with the click of a button, and automatic image scaling will do all of the arranging and beautifying for you. But Squarespace isn't just a website builder. They also have all the tools you could possibly need to run your website, like analytics for every single aspect of your website and store, SEO tools to get you in search results for the people who are actually looking for you. And like I mentioned a second ago, they have an e-commerce platform so that you can sell your art or your wares, whatever kind of goods you happen to sell, whether it's physical goods, digital media, your services, or even exclusive memberships. And they can even help you make your own print-on-demand merch using their custom merch feature, which is really great if you're busy, like I am. So if you find yourself in need of a website, portfolio, or online store, you can head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch your site, you can head to squarespace.com/pricklyalpaca to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much as always to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Now let's get drawing.
So the first character I ended up going with is called Cassandra, and she was submitted by @NoodleFusa, who also goes by Ruby. Ruby's email says, "When I saw your story, I just knew I had to send you my plant witch OC, Cassandra. Her goal in life is to collect every single flower in her realm, and of course she ends up trespassing in areas she isn't meant to be, causing all kinds of problems. She's very sweet and gentle. Her catchphrase is, 'Be careful.' She is a cyclops, a lot taller than an average person, and tends to overcompensate by being attentive to others. Her teacher was a gnome, and his race turns into flowers when they die, so she wants to study the other traits flowers carry in the hopes of being helpful, as she feels she takes up too much space. She's the OC I draw to relax." So after seeing Cassandra for the first time and reading all that, I just fell in love with this character design. I think she's so cute and so pretty, and I just love all of the like floral plant witch things that are going on. You guys know I'm an absolute sucker for a plant witch. So going off that description of Cassandra and her character, I knew I wanted wanted to draw her amidst some kind of flower quest, just alone in the wilderness, in the middle of nowhere, trying to find and study different flowers and collect different things. And I also get just very calm energy from Cassandra, and with the description of her being very sweet and kind of mild-mannered, I wanted to go with like a very calming, kind of cool environment, which also led me to wanting to do kind of like a nighttime scene, something that happens at dusk or just after sunset that feels very peaceful. And I also kind of wanted to include fireflies or little glowing orbs in this. I don't know, I got a very specific scene in my mind whenever I read Cassandra's description. And if you're wondering how I kind of chose characters for this video and the previous Drawing Your OCs videos that I've done in the past, that's basically how I do it. I'm sure given enough time I could come up with cool illustrations of all of your characters, because a lot of them are very unique and they have really cool premises and obviously awesome character designs. Sorry, my phone just went off. I usually just start with whatever characters give me like a clear scene in my head or give me like something that I'm really passionate about drawing and putting to paper. And then I just go from there. So please don't feel bad if your character didn't end up getting chosen for this video, because it is a very random process and it definitely in no way says anything about like whether or not I like your character. I'm gonna like your character. So anyways, I'm sure the recording has gotten ahead of me a bit at this point, but I started out by doing a bunch of little pose thumbnails. I've been trying to do this with my artwork more frequently because it can be tempting to like go into a sketch and start getting super detailed with it immediately, but oftentimes like it's not gonna be my best sketch, especially with something that's kind of a little stick figure like this. So I have been going way more into like iteration, you know, the thing that is often recommended. And I didn't do a ton here, but I definitely think just a couple little sketches got me to a way better pose than the first one that I like started out with. For the pose here, I wanted to do something that was kind of like graceful and floaty and feminine, something that went along with the peaceful theme of the illustration and something that indicates that she's sort of searching and she's kind of like immersed in the wonder of this particular scene, because you'll see more as I render it, but I'm going for like a very peaceful like wildflower meadow. And I also wanted to add a bunch of like little fireflies to this illustration because I feel like that's just something a plant witch is going to be fascinated by. Since this scene is also taking place in like the wilderness, kind of in the middle of nowhere, I also wanted to make sure the scale of everything and kind of the isolation of everything was being sold well. So for the background, I also went and did like a little value study of it first before I like did it later, just to make sure the character is like actually set within the background and everything is reading well. I had like a very particular vision in mind for this. So before I started inking and refining the sketch, I had a couple reference photos up and I roughed in those tones real quick to make sure the background was looking pretty good before I went into the whole like inking process. Before my inks, I did like my usual refined sketch where I define the detail just a little bit more and I try to like make sure the face looks good, and my inks for this piece are also just like my very standard normal inks. I wanted to be a little bit more relaxed with the character art itself for these pieces, or at least like not stray too far from like my norm, because I've done a lot of like painting and other thing in the past, but I think with the pieces this time I was focusing a lot on like cohesion and making sure the whole looked good whenever you're like zoomed out and just looking at it as a full piece. So I tried not to get too lost in the sauce with like the character details, but I am still very fond of how these inks came out. I especially like her face. Drawing a Cyclops was like intimidating because I feel like in my style, since it's a little bit more realistic, the eye placement can look super weird, but I think it came together really well. And I also love drawing like a good plant corset and some wispy hair, so this is just kind of like relaxation time for me, really. For the flat colors of this character, once I started on that whole process, since this character has like some traditional art of her and a digital piece that the artist submitted, I kind of color picked colors from each and kind of just met in the middle on some, depending on what looked best with my particular art style. Again, I love this character's design. I think she's so cute. I love her like white-ish lavender hair. I love her like floral armor or something that she's got going on here. That's sort of how I chose to interpret it. I don't know if that's like completely accurate, but it goes hard. Anyways, getting a little bit further into the rendering stages of the illustration. For the background, I wanted to experiment a little bit with some things that I haven't exactly done before with backgrounds, because I struggle a lot with like taking values and just converting them into literally just colors. It's something I'm trying to get better at. Oftentimes I usually make the colors too saturated, which like alters the value. It's a whole thing. So this time I made my little rough grayscale study detailed enough and organized enough to just use that, because I had everything on separate layers, and I basically went about coloring the rough layers of the background by locking them and then having a clipping mask over each of one of those layers and just using a color layer on top of that. That way I didn't really have to worry about it. I've never really done that before, but I've heard so many artists talk about working that way whenever they're going from like grayscale to color, and I have to say I really enjoyed it on this piece. To add a lot of the details to the background, because there were a lot of like trees in the very back and there are a lot of wildflowers in the foreground, I used a bunch of like flower and foliage brushes that I have. I'll try and link those in the description because it's just a free brush pack and they're wonderful. But I absolutely love using these brushes. I highly recommend them. I mean, it's not too terrible to like draw this by hand because it's like pretty vague foliage, but it's just nice to have like a lot more texture going on and obviously get it done a little bit faster. It just sounds like I'm doing an ad for this brush pack at this point, I know, but there's also like a lot of variety in here. So like I could get a lot of different wildflowers and weeds and different kinds of brush sticking up. It was just very nice. Again, like brainless, kind of peaceful, intuitive art, which was really fun on this piece because later in the video the pieces get a lot more challenging. So after I roughed in the background and all of those different wildflowers, I started adding in some magic effects because, like I said, I wanted to have fireflies kind of hovering around and framing the scene, and I also wanted Cassandra to be kind of using some magic in this scene. If nothing else, just to kind of like frame her and silhouette her against the sky a little bit more and just make it have like more intense vibes. Like, I'm me. I like an illustration to feel whimsical, so when I have a witch character, I'm gonna have little sparkles around them. I added a couple of different glowing effects around Cassandra. I added some glow like behind her, and then I also added some glow kind of above her, framing her as if she's doing a spell of some sorts. And I kind of imagine like maybe she's using this to search for like a flower. And I don't know a whole lot about this character, but in my mind, in this illustration, I think that she's using the fireflies to kind of like tell her where it is, or she's communicating with them or something like that. And that's like what the whole magic situation is here. And I think that is not only very cute, but I also think it's very on brand for a plant witch to use bugs to tell her where the flowers she's looking for is. I mean, that is very wholesome. Anyways, I didn't go too crazy on the final rendering stage for this piece. I wanted to keep this a little bit more like anime or graphic feeling. I think the colors and the mood of the scene was already doing like a lot of heavy lifting here, so I didn't want to overwork it necessarily. So the shading for this one was basically just like a gradient map to kind of like anchor her in the scene that I then set to multiply, and then I did some like erasing on that to add a few lighting effects, and then I had like another multiply layer that I used to do a little bit more cell shading, and then I had a couple of highlight layers as well. I think I just set those to like the add/glow blend mode, and then as always I had a paint over layer that I used to add some like highlights or clean things up, mostly add like little hair strands and just a little extra detail here and there. And then for the final finishing touches, I added just a little bit more blue glow to things. I messed around once again with a couple gradient maps, added some light noise, and then she was done. Anyways, I absolutely loved drawing this character, Ruby. Thank you so much for submitting her, and I hope you like it. So next up we have Kenji, Isabel, and Daniel, which were all submitted by Esteban. And Esteban says in his email a little info about them. They are in a band together and their instruments are haunted. Kenji is the drummer, Dan's the bassist, and Issa is the guitarist/vocalist. Ken is dating Dan, and Dan is Issa's older brother. So the drummer and the bassist here are boyfriends. Esteban also associates them with animals. Ken is a wolf, Dan is a snake, and Issa is an eel. And finally he says, I don't draw them in color super often anymore because my comic Ghost Notes is black and white, so Dan's reference is quite old, but it gets the idea across. So obviously with this group, they had me at like a ghost band with haunted instruments. I just think that's so cool. I'm a sucker for a spooky band. Blame it on watching gratuitous amounts of Scooby-Doo as a child. And my partner and I are also currently rewatching Mystery Incorporated, so I was definitely in like a Hex Girls mood going into this illustration. So for this one, I definitely wanted to lay down some moody vibes, and I absolutely had to draw the band playing together on stage. It was just a obligatory. Had to do it. I think they're really cool. And I also really wanted to find a way to incorporate the hauntedness of their instruments, even though I'm not really sure what form that takes based on this email. Based on the email, I also would assume that this exists as a comic somewhere, at least like in some concept. So I did do a little bit of digging around their Instagram, and I couldn't find anywhere the comic is listed, so I couldn't like dig into the comic or anything and see how the instruments, you know, display their hauntedness. So I'm sorry, Esteban, for this one. I ended up putting it up to like my own interpretation, but I hope that it is acceptable. So for the sketch here, I wanted to mostly have the focus on Issa with like the two boys behind her, kind of framing her since they're like in a trio. So I wanted to use that to like frame everything. I should silence my phone. Oh my gosh. And whenever I was initially working on the sketch for this, I also was at first wanting to get like a little ambitious and do a crazy perspective, like a fisheye thing or something that just is like super edgy, something that fits in well with like band photo vibes. But I quickly discovered just how far above my pay grade that is right now. I have been practicing crazy perspectives a lot more lately, but I'm a little rusty. So I kind of did like a cheated perspective on this one just to like give Issa's pose a little bit more flair and fit all of her in like the composition and everything. It's not at all accurate, and in the end I do think it makes her look like a little shorter than she's probably intended to be. Her reference is that she's 5'8", so she's not like tiny. You know, it's just one of those things. I'm still learning perspective, but I tried to frame up these poses as best as I could. I kind of gave the band almost like a ladder effect to the composition where it's Issa and then it's Dan on the left and then Kenji on the right, kind of like leading up towards the top of the composition. At least that's what I was trying to do. And I also put Dan in like a cool little bassist guitarist pose. I feel like I always see bassists striking this pose. I was gonna have him with his foot on top of an amp or part of the sound system, but it's behind Issa, so I kind of cheaped out on that. But as the drummer, I also wanted to try and give Ken like an energetic pose, make it look like he is like mid swing with his drumstick, because drummers always have like the most intense energy. They always look like they're having an amazing time. And I feel like musician poses can look a little stiff, like they're a little challenging to me in that aspect. So I was really trying to like sell that energy, even though this is a static pose. And after enough tweaking, I think I did land on something that felt energetic enough. I think adding like essentially a smear frame to his drumsticks to make it look motion blurred added a lot of energy to it. And I think that wispiness also played into the composition well, which is another thing I really struggled with on this piece. Once I finished the rough sketch, I ended up making the canvas a lot taller in order to fit like a main ghost figure kind of looming above them, because I thought that would be the most like imposing, impactful way to show a ghost figure, almost like they summon it with their instruments and a physical form looms above them during their show. That's sort of what I wanted to go for with this. And some of that struggle came in with not knowing exactly how I wanted to stylize the ghost in their physical form. Again, I'm not even sure the haunting in the context of the story even involves a ghost. Haunted can mean many things, but this is just sort of like how I meant to portray it. So again, the voiceover probably isn't lining up with this, but before going into inking in the actual illustration, I once again did like a little grayscale study situation to kind of figure out what the heck I'm doing. And I was still a little iffy on it going into lining and coloring mode, but I decided to just dive in and go for it and kind of see what I can come up with along the way, which definitely proved to be a gigantic challenge. Like with this piece, inking the characters, doing the character art themselves, that was all like super chill, really cool. I really enjoyed drawing all of these characters and trying to like translate them into my art style. I hope that I did all of them justice. I really enjoy drawing Issa, especially in her like super long hair, and working that into the composition and just like going crazy. That was a lot of fun. I even enjoyed, for the most part, drawing instruments, which is like up there with the artist's like least favorite things to draw. Sort of up there with hands, unless you're like one of those crazy people that like to draw hands, but instruments are tough. I had to use a lot of reference for these, and I think they turned out pretty decent. The only thing that I'm not entirely sure of is the drum kit, because I really have no concept of that. I play guitar, so I've played an electric guitar and a bass guitar before, so I like get the concept of it, and I tried to make the finger positions accurate and how you strum and such. Drums, I have no idea. So those of you who drum, feel free to comment and tell me what I did wrong. Anyways, the main thing that I struggled with in this illustration illustration was the color of it all, which is not typically something I struggle with the most. There's definitely other things that are like higher on my little struggle chart, but for some reason after I got past the flats of this, I was just sort of lost in the sauce, and I couldn't really make it come together quite how I wanted to. First of all, I decided with the color palette and everything going on here, I wanted to lean strongly into green for the group's aesthetic. Maybe it's just because Issa and Ken both have like green tones in their clothes or whatever, but I feel like that's a pretty safe bet for the aesthetic of this group, so I gave all of their instruments green tones. Whenever I was done with the flat color, I also added like green gradient maps over all of them set to a multiply to kind of shade them and blend them in a little bit more with the whole background. And from there I started shading Issa. I started doing like the spotlight shading that I had in the little like rough thumbnail, and immediately the all green aesthetic was just feeling very flat and very one note. It just wasn't capturing quite what I was imagining in my head for this piece, which was a lot more like of an intense concert aesthetic. Like concerts tend to be very colorful, very intense, so honestly I don't hate the all green as much looking at it now, but it's still a little bit too minimal for me. And certainly at the time of drawing this, I decided I wanted to use a secondary color in here and kind of add a little bit more complexity to the color palette. So I started trying to use more of a complementary green, pink, or magenta color palette with like maybe some hits of purple in there. I decided to make that spotlight on Issa that pink color to kind of set her apart from the two boys that are playing the instruments, because like vocalist and everything. I started adding a bunch of pink rim light onto Dan and Ken just to try to anchor them in the scene a little bit more. Again, give it a little bit more of that like interesting concert lighting going on. And of course for the ghost behind them, I ended up doing a pretty detailed sketch of that whenever I like initially did my grayscale version of this. So to bring that into the final illustration, I basically just did my color layer thing again with some green, and then I cleaned it up a little bit more with just some rough painting. And I was really fond of how this ghost looked. I mean, it was very spooky and tattered, and like, you know, it looks like a Scooby-Doo ghost. I'm being very true to my roots here. But in also being very true to myself, I decided it wasn't enough. I wanted more ghosts in the scene, and this is a concept that I really wanted to integrate really since the beginning of this illustration, just show like ghosts flying out from the instruments and just having like this explosion of haunting going on. Like, how cool would it be to go to a concert and the band's instruments are haunted and you just get like basically a ghost pyrotechnic display as you watch the show? And these days you'd probably leave and go like, oh wow, those were some really cool practical effects they had going on. Little do you know it's real. They're just haunted. So anyways, once I populated the scene with tiny little ghosts, ones that are like a little cuter, they almost look like they could be Studio Ghibli ghosts, you know, I kind of wanted to give the impression that the bandmates themselves were almost becoming like possessed in a way, or like a vessel for the haunting and the ghosts or something like that. I just thought it would be like a cool concept visually, so I ended up adding some eye glow to all three of the band members. And by the end of the illustration, I also added glowing effects to the hands of the characters that are playing the guitar, and some glowing effects to Kenji's drumming as well. I just really wanted to make it look like the summoning and the ghosts of it all definitely has something to do with them and them playing their instruments, you know, because that is sort of the point. And the last bit of this illustration is really just me overworking this illustration. I was really struggling to be satisfied with the end result of this, and the more I looked at it, the more I was like, it just doesn't really look right. Like, the colors just still were not vibing for me. I did a lot of adjustments with brightness and contrast sliders whenever the illustration was in grayscale to like try to tweak things and make sure the values were kind of staying on track. That still didn't quite work because I didn't really love it whenever I turned the color back on. So I tried a couple of different things to add more color and pizzazz. I added some like magenta flames behind the group, just, you know, more band stuff. I thought haunted flames would look cool, so I added some. I tried shading the larger ghost a little differently because I didn't love the bright spot of value that took up so much of the upper part of the illustration. I just feel like it was kind of a weak focal point in some ways. I went back and forth on that just a ton. And I also even added like a bunch of lightning effects to this just because I wanted some kind of particle to show that spooky things were happening and there's like energy around, and I don't know how well lightning does that, but that is the medium I chose. By the end I was just going crazy, adding tweaks and more intense colors. I definitely increased the saturation a little bit because I thought it was looking a little bit too flat, and through a lot of tweaking and just messing around, losing my mind for several hours straight just on like the very last bit of this illustration, I think I got to a place that I was pretty happy with. I think the main thing that I was struggling with was capturing the haunted energy well enough, and I think by the end I did. I think this looks like a haunted illustration. It looks spooky, but in that like Scooby-Doo type of way. And since I was happy with it, as a final finishing touch, since this is presumably a comic, I thought it would be cool if this felt a bit like a poster or like a comic cover that's completely the wrong proportions to be a comic cover. So I traced over the little Ghost Notes logo that Esteban included in his email, and I added it over the ghost as like a little optional title card, which with this composition I think it looks really cool with like a little title thing. It seems right, but I also do like how it looks without it. So Esteban, thank you so much for submitting your characters. I love them. They're so cool. I hope what I've done here is not too far away from what you have in your actual story, and I hope you like it. Last up, we have two bug-themed girlfriends, Ruby and Eladay, which were submitted by Chevelle. I hope that I'm saying all of those names properly. Chevelle says, "Hi, these are my two bug girls. Ruby is a rosy maple moth and Eladay is a ladybug. Fun fact, their names are based off of the bug's scientific names. Ruby canonically has 4 arms, but you get lazy and draw her with 2 sometimes. They are girlfriends. They do not have much of a backstory right now, but I can give a little info about each of them. Ruby is of course a rosy maple moth girl. She and her girlfriend live in a forest cottage together. Ruby spends most of her free time gardening, crocheting clothes for herself and friends, journaling, and gardening. She really likes gardening. She uses she/her pronouns, and her favorite color is pink. She never takes off her favorite necklace as it was a gift, and she enjoys wearing a wide variety of clothes she owns, so have fun with her outfits. Eladay is of course a ladybug girl. She enjoys to cook for Ruby and is very into fashion, so she takes pride in her outfits. She often wears custom crochet pieces made by Ruby. Eladay also uses she/they pronouns, and they say, again, I am still working out the story, so have fun with it. So for this one, as you can see, I kind of started getting a little ambitious right from the jump. Basically, whenever I saw that Ruby was a crocheter, I immediately knew that I wanted to draw them in some kind of like cozy, homey scene together. Also, just hearing that they live in a cottage in the forest, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to draw this cottage in the forest. And I also was kind of looking for an excuse to draw just like a cute room interior, because I never get to draw stuff like that. And even though they're like really hard and challenging to me, and drawing in perspective is like often a nightmare, it's also something that I have been wanting to challenge myself to do more frequently. I've done a lot more studies of like outdoor background environments than I have of like anything interior, so my experience is like pretty unbalanced in that way. And again, I want to be able to draw like super cute aesthetic interiors, because it also makes me so mad just going on Pinterest and seeing all of the AI slop. I feel a moral obligation to contribute aesthetic room interiors to the world that are not AI slop. So basically I just wanted to draw Ruby and Eladay just hanging out together in their home, in their bedroom, just like doing their little creative hobbies together. I feel like one of the beautiful things about cohabitating with your partner is being able to just hang out with them and like do your separate little tasks and like hobbies, but also like be spending time together. So that's the general vibe I was trying to capture with this illustration. So as you could probably see at this point of the illustration, the first thing that I really needed to figure out was the environment that these characters are going to be hanging out in. I am definitely not great at figuring out perspectives or anything like that, so I just grabbed a perspective grid off the internet, and I took inspiration for this perspective from a room photo that I saw on Pinterest. That room also had like a very similar layout to this one. It was like a loft situation with some windows that were similar, but I also took a lot of liberties with this just to make it a little bit more whimsical and make it something that I think that these girls would actually live in. So with the sketch, I really started with the big stuff, the architectural elements, the bed, a couple of pieces of furniture, and then I started trying to sprinkle in some little home goods and decor and items that I just think they would have around to make the room feel a little bit more lived in. And once that was all down, I of course did a little rough sketch of the girls just to sort of get a rough idea of where I wanted them to be in the room. I put Ruby kind of sitting on the windowsill because I knew that I wanted to have her crocheting. That's like a big inspiration for this piece because I'm also working on a crochet video parallel to working on this one, so I was just like in that cozy crochet mood, so I knew that's what I wanted her to do. And then for Elliday, they also like to write poetry or read poetry, I would assume, so I wanted to have them just sort of like lying on the bed relaxed, like either writing or reading a poetry journal, that sort of thing. I think it also would have been really cute to have Elliday like cooking something, but I didn't place this scene in a kitchen, so that would have felt like maybe a little bit out of place. So as I did with the previous illustrations, once I finished the rough sketches for these, I also did like a bit of a grayscale study, nothing too intense, but I just wanted to get that general lighting placed and everything, make sure that I knew what I was doing in terms of that. Thankfully, I did have a pretty solid idea in my head of the direction that I wanted to go in for this illustration. Once I was pretty certain of that, of course, I went pretty much directly into inking the background because I wanted it to be a very like graphic, illustrative thing. I decided not to paint this one because there are just too many complicated elements. Me and my painting style, I knew that I would have driven myself crazy. So lines were really helpful for organizing this. And yes, inking this took absolutely forever. I am reminded of why I don't often ink backgrounds every time I try to do one. I do think painting backgrounds tends to be way faster, especially in my art style. But again, I just struggle to capture as much detail whenever I'm like purely painting versus actually going in and inking and adding lines and that sort of thing. But even though inking this was extremely tedious and trying to get the perspective right of all of the little details and elements probably took years off of my life, I also had a really fun time working on this. It has been absolutely forever since I have done an illustration like this of any kind, and I definitely had a blast drawing in all the tiny little details and like the molding and the furniture and like the clutter, just trying to make their bedroom look as whimsical as possible, because I also like very selfishly went with an aesthetic that I personally really like for bedrooms. So it's like a very whimsigoth, very like fantasy nature aesthetic going on here, but I feel like that also like fits really well for a couple of bug girls living in the woods. So since I was very familiar with the aesthetic that I was kind of using for this, it was pretty intuitive to figure out all of the decor and the clutter and that sort of thing. I even selfishly included a couple of lamps that I want. I'm still gunning for that dragonfly lamp. One of these days I'm gonna get one. I also added like shelf fungi shelves on the wall and like a dagger and things that I literally have on my bedroom wall, because honestly through making this I was just looking over to my gallery wall and being like, what else can I put on the wall? What else would they have? It's crazy how even after adding so much clutter to this illustration and just like details and bits and bobs throughout the end, there's still more clutter to add. Like just the inks alone were not enough. I had to go in and add like a little bit more. Even though I was definitely projecting a lot of beautiful things that I like to have in my home onto this bedroom, I also wanted to make sure that there were plenty of things that reflected the characters in this, at least as much as I knew about them. So since Ruby is really into gardening, I made sure to have lots of like foliage and hanging plants around, just like lots of house plants. I have a bunch in the corner. I have vines growing throughout the room, and I even used like the little railing in the illustration later on as like a railing planter, which is something that I've seen a couple of times on Pinterest that I absolutely love. I'm definitely someone who would put greenery on every single surface of my home if it didn't mean having to dust fake plants or keep real ones alive, you know? Anyways, after inking in all of those tedious little details, I also went back and just did a basic grayscale pass of the colors for this one, just to make it a little easier on myself later and to help me know what I was looking at. It's really easy for my brain personally to kind of get lost whenever I'm looking at just a bunch of lines that don't have any like form or shading to them. So I made sure to fill in the basic values before adding the girls. That way I could figure out exactly where I want them to sit and make sure they're kind of fitting properly within the illustration and according to this perspective that I have going on, which is always very challenging to work under. And I definitely did my best with the perspective on this one. I definitely did struggle a lot, but a little bit less with Ruby. I started with my refined sketch, of course, and for Ruby I also made sure to draw her with 4 arms because one of my ideas for this illustration was to have her working on 2 crochet projects at once, because if you had 4 arms, why wouldn't you? So I made both sets of arms crocheting as she's sitting in her little windowsill pose. And Elodie is a lot more difficult to nail down pose-wise because she's like in a more skewed perspective. I tried to foreshorten the upper part of Elodie's body as best as I could in this perspective, since their like head and torso is like further away from the camera than the legs and everything. Again, I'm trying my best here. It doesn't look perfect. And I also definitely made like the bed too small according to this perspective. Like it doesn't quite fit properly in the space. Like it's definitely not big enough for 2 people, but just like don't think about that. This is definitely a big adventure out of my comfort zone, so I'm gonna be a little nice to myself about the poor perspective of the bed. And in terms of the wacky perspective and everything going on, I definitely think the inks of the girls helped everything a lot. I think it cleaned everything up tremendously. I tried to work really hard on the faces and the hands and the posing and everything to make it look natural and normal, which especially with Ruby's 2 sets of hands, that was pretty tricky given like the crochet poses, but I think I kind of pulled it off. It doesn't look too bad. When it came to their outfits, I did end up taking a lot of liberties to make them have like cozier attire, but Chevelle did say to go crazy. So for Ruby, I gave her kind of a modified version of the outfit in her reference, just with like some cute crochet shorts instead of the skirt that she's got on, and I also gave her like super long fuzzy thigh socks because I feel like the hands of a Rosie Maple Moth look kind of like that anyways. I just thought it would really suit her. I struggled more with Elodie's outfit because I didn't want to make their design too overwhelmingly red, and Elodie's ref also had an outfit that was just a little bit more difficult for me to translate into casual, so I basically went with like a little baseball tee, some jean shorts, and some like ladybug colored tube socks. I don't think this is a perfect outfit for her, but I think it fits well with the colors of the illustration. That's one of the main things I was trying to capture with this. I also ended up coloring the crochet project that Ruby is working on to look like one of the outfits in Elodie's ref, so Ruby is definitely working on a cute little outfit for Elodie here. Now, getting into the coloring and rendering process of this illustration, this was extremely challenging. You probably gleaned that from me mentioning that like I never do stuff like this. It took me a really long time to get this to a place where I was like happy with it, and I feel like it was matching kind of the general vision that I had in my head. But like I did on the first illustration of Cassandra, I basically worked backwards from just values and grayscale with this one once again. That's basically why I went to the trouble of going in with just all grays and quote coloring things to begin with. That way I could give things tonality and then sort of decide on colors later using a lot of gradient maps and hue and saturation sliders and just doing things in a way that is a lot less committal. Even though adding color to this was a little bit tricky at first because it's just not at all how I'm used to working, it was way easier to just go in with grays first and just decide this is how light or dark I want this item to be, and start just building up everything in terms of values where it's super clear and it's really easy to kind of see how the light should behave, how the shading should behave. Because then once I got to the phase of messing around with gradient maps and color blend mode layers and that sort of thing, I only had to worry about the hue itself, and it was also very easy to change. And I did change my mind a ton whenever I was working on the colors for this because I didn't have an exact like color scheme for the room. I just had vibes in my mind, but thankfully I do follow a lot of people who have homes in this style on Instagram, so I was able to look up a little bit of reference of like what kind of paint colors did people use on the walls, and like what does their bedding look like, what kind of flooring and furniture do they have. And since most of the people have already figured out like what looks good together for me, I was able to like kind of start getting a groove going and start getting colors together that looked nice and complementary and not terrible. So once I established a basic color scheme of like purple and green and magenta, a couple of yellows here and there, it really helped to start figuring out all of the adjacent colors and the accent colors, and I decided to make sure most of the base colors for the walls and everything were a little bit more muted. That way I could add really intense pops of colors, especially with the 2 lamps that I added to this illustration. This style is also very eclectic, so all of the clutter and everything, I could add a bunch of different like little hints of color in there, while still staying mostly within like the Joel tone family, because that's what tends to look good in this color scheme and what looks good together. And once I had basic colors figured out, it was on to adding more shading and rendering to the piece, which was a whole entire process. It took so long, and it was really easy to just keep going and going with this one, because with a piece like this, there's so much detail. I could just render it for hours and hours and hours, and there's like a really good chance of overworking it whenever there's this much stuff going on. I tried not to go too crazy, but I definitely got a little lost in the sauce with this illustration, because there's like a bunch of different light sources going on. There's a bunch of different like potential for reflection and just straight up rendering. There's so much rendering you could do with this to make it look just a little bit better and a little bit better. But to simplify things as much as I can manage, I basically started out by defining all of the light sources in the room, because that is going to determine pretty much everything that's going on. So there's a couple of windows that light is coming from. There's one that is implied that's sort of off screen that's casting light around the ladder, and then there's a couple of lamps, so I made sure to define the lighting around those areas. And I also wanted to use like a couple of different colors to make the illustration pop a little bit. So the dragonfly lamp, which I am very personally obsessed with and I will acquire one of these days, I gave that one a little bit more of a yellowish teal hue to it, create a little bit more contrast in that part of the room. And then for the other lamp that's in that more like Victorian style, I gave it a much warmer light, one that's almost a red. I see lamps like this all the time in the flea mall, and I also very much want one, but I think their lighting effect is really pretty and it's very cozy and moody and unique. I also forgot that I added a light on the ceiling along with a couple of lanterns, so those got a little bit more defined as well, although they're not casting like a ton of light on the characters because they're not as intense as some of the other light sources that are going on in the room. During this phase, I also made sure to add a little bit of separation to the different planes of the illustration, so I added a little bit more light and color behind the railing and everything to that. That way the railing was definitely like in a bit of a darker value place than everything else and appears a little bit closer to the viewer. I also did the same with making the shelves near the ladder brighter since they have some direct sunlight being cast on them. And during this phase, I also played around with a lot of lighting on Ruby and Elliday because there's so much cast light and bounce lighting and lamps and stuff going on. It was honestly a blast to light the two of them, but also a little bit challenging, especially with Elliday because I just was struggling a little bit with the lighting being cast like on her hair, which I now realize I definitely made entirely too long. Sorry about that. Elliday's hair is supposed to be shoulder length, so that cast light was also making their skin tone a little bit too muddy. It was just a lot easier to light Ruby since she's sitting on a windowsill and a lot of that light is being cast like on her back and I don't have to worry as much about it. So during the final phase of the illustration, once I'm pretty happy with the general lighting scheme and shading going on, I usually go in with a paint over layer and basically just manually paint over top of all of my layers that I have going on and fix and paint over anything that I don't really like, that I don't think is working with all of my blend modes. I much prefer doing this than altering things on my physical layers because blend modes are so finicky and you change one and you change how all of them look, and it's just way easier to get a very intentional result by just like painting and color picking and that sort of thing. So that's one of the things that I did to sort of like fix some of the muddiness that was going on with Elliday, make the lighting a little bit more accurate and more like flattering and that sort of thing. I also did a little bit of paint over work on Ruby in the same way and basically did a full paint over pass of the entire illustration, just going over it and finding little bits and bobs that I wasn't super pleased with lighting wise or detail wise and just painting over it and fixing it the way that I wanted it to look. I highly recommend this method if you have a bit more of a painterly or traditionally inspired art style because it's a lot easier than having to mess with blend modes and layers and that sort of thing. I think blend modes and layers and lines are so good for setting the foundation of an illustration, but then after that's like set in stone, I like to have control over it and do whatever I want to it. So that's what I did here. I also did a detail pass here here where all of the shelves got like additional books and trinkets, and I made sure that things had like a little bit of highlight and reflection going on. I also gave these girls an unsolicited cat. You're welcome. I just feel like you've got to have an unsolicited cat, so I added a little calico in the corner just as like a little friend. And this is really when I just go into a trance and get lost in illustration and just add stuff, fix lighting, correct things according to my whims. I ended up adding like wisteria and a bunch of different plant effects going on. I added a couple sparkles here and there because why not? But at a certain point with this illustration, it was definitely time to stop because I could have gone further than how this ended up being, but it was like getting a little insane and crazy, and I'm not sure it was really creating a benefit to the piece at this point. So this is basically where I said, all right, enough is enough. It's looking good. I'm really very pleased with it myself by now. So Chevelle, thank you so much for submitting Ruby and Eladay. I had so much fun drawing them, and I hope you enjoy the piece. It's a lot, and I hope it's not too far off of what their lovely home would look like. And with that, here are all of the finished illustrations, and I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who submitted a character, even if I didn't choose them for this particular video. I loved going through them, and I definitely have gotten more character submissions since I recorded for this video, so if your character didn't get chosen this time, don't even worry about it because I'm definitely going to do another one of these videos pretty soon, if not in December, maybe in January or February, and I'm going to pull from the exact same batch of characters because there's so many good ones in there that I loved that I didn't get a chance to get to in this video. So definitely stay tuned and subscribe or follow me on Instagram if you want to keep up with that. I'll probably open submissions briefly before making that video to get a couple more people in. If you want to submit a character for the next video, the correct email is still listed on my Instagram in my story highlights. It's going to be directly on the top of my page. I cannot emphasize enough, do not send these submissions to my business email. That's not for y'all. That is for business inquiries only. I still get a couple submissions to that every now and then, even though I have it explicitly listed in my description not to send submissions there. Please don't send them. It clogs up that email and it takes up storage, and I have business correspondence to do on that email, so just, you know, that's your heads up. I don't even read the ones that get sent to the wrong email. They get deleted, so please send them to the correct email so I can actually see your characters. Anyways, all that being said, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and especially Ruby, Esteban, Chevelle, I hope you guys enjoyed the art. I will send you high-res files of your pieces directly to your emails, so these will definitely find their way to you. But as always, thank you so much for watching, especially if you watched till the end of the video. And as always, the biggest thank you for this video and every single one of my videos goes to my lovely patrons and especially my executive producers. This is Exhausting, Eileen, Hesta Boone, Doomsday Outlaw, Alfred Nightingale, Ty Bear, Cinderus, Speak of the Devil, Tirotu, Donna Shipley, Mystic, Scribble, Mushroom Sita, Ghastly, Galaxy Stardust 035, Luxabar, My Name is A, Miss Fenris, Nylode Nom, Cyrus Orion, Jenny Craftsman, I Do TKD, Ren, Band Off the Yellow, Cloud Max, Velly Smelly, Stabby Horse, Heebie Jeebies, Cardia X, Christina Kimtia Art, Fiasco, Mossy Raven, Silver, 2 Prism, I'm not saying that name on the internet, ABW Makes, Icecavan, Awendu, Liana, Ermler Jean, Breeza, Freedom and Gus Gus, Dodo, Agent Sketchy, Thea Maia, Lovisa, Eloquent Silence, Sushi McNushi, Hypno, Sweet Winter Garden, Gravity Drop, I Hang Out with Cats at Parties, and Bean the Bread.